Good evening, North Andover. This is the Board of Selectmen and Licensing Commissioners meeting on Monday, December 7th, 2020. This is a virtual session, and I am reading a announcement from the governor. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GLC 30A, Section 18, and the governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the North Andover Board of Selectmen will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at www.northandoverma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so on their television by tuning to Comcast Channel 8 or Verizon Channel 26 or online at www.northandovercam.org. No in-person attendance of meetings of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the North Andover Town website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. So I'd like to call our meeting to order with a roll call vote of attendees, please.
Laura Bates here.
Rosemary Smedili here.
Richard Valancourt here.
Thank you. And Chris Nobley here. Phil DiCalogero has not joined us at the moment, but we'll proceed as we have a quorum. First on our agenda is public comments, which as usual for these virtual meetings may be submitted at www.northandoverma.gov/SB public comments. And do we have any public comments for the meeting submitted?
Mr. Chair, we do have one public comment, which I will read.
Thank you.
It is from Jerry Justin, who lives at 20 Olympic Lane, and he would like me to read his comments aloud. I am speaking as a resident and not as a trustee of Osgood Hill. I concur with the recommendation of the town manager to transfer a stabilization fund to support the Stevens estate. The full analysis and any associated assumptions used by the town to project retained earnings for the Stevens estate at the end of fiscal year 21 should be provided to the select board and trustees of Osgood Hill. In addition, Joanna's effort to continue to book events in fiscal year 21 and future years should be supported by the town. I suggest this is not advertised as closing the Stevens estate, but taking advantage of the normally slow period to reduce expenses, which Joanna has done a good job with as part of her normal duties. That is the only public comment, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. And thank you. We appreciate that insight and that input. So pursuant to that, our only business is old business, which is a vote to transfer an amount of up to $300,000 from the stabilization fund to the FY21 Stevens Estate Enterprise Fund budget, as we discussed last week. So we had this was introduced last night. We kind of walked through it. Are there any other comments or perspectives, Town Manager, you'd like to add to our discussion or follow-up?
Nothing new, Mr. Chair. The only question that I received that I think is covered in the memo, but I will just explain it again, is what would happen if we do not make the vote. And so if we don't make the vote, it would automatically be raised on the tax levy and paid by taxpayers at an expense of approximately $30 for the average taxpayer. That question was asked of me today. Other than that, nothing has changed.
Okay, thank you. May I ask the other members questions or follow-up to our discussion last week when this was introduced and where we are tonight for this vote?
Rosemary, I agree with the town manager. We certainly don't want to be adding to the taxpayers' tax burden over this when there is a solution. I'm just still very just disappointed that we were not made aware of this a lot earlier. All of this really could have been avoided, I think, prior to town meeting, but and with town meeting votes. But I think it would just look bad and appear almost confusing if all of a sudden we are now raising the taxes by approximately $30 on all of our ratepayers. So I think it's something that we need to move forward with, as much as I'm not particularly enamored with it. But I think it's the right way to go.
But I'm curious, how could we have resolved this at town meeting? We weren't aware of this at town meeting.
No, well, that's the whole thing. I think if we were made aware of it, we could have maybe worked it into the budget somehow. If what was coming from the Department of DOR, if they had this change coming forward that we kind of got blindsided by at the last minute. That's what I'm trying to say. Maybe I didn't say it artfully enough, but that's.
No, I guess my point is this is all brought in by the lack of bookings because of COVID-19. So I don't know at town meeting we could have predicted this or any of that.
I just think that you could reallocate different portions of the budget or whatever we could do. I think it would have been helpful to be able to plan ahead and maybe make some changes at the town meeting at our budget. That's what I'm saying.
I think Phil joined us. Phil, are you with us now?
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm
Yes.
sorry if my speaker isn't working.
Good.
I mean, I definitely don't want to repeat anything that anyone's already said. I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I understand that we are in between a rock and a hard place, and I very much appreciate the town manager's regular conversations. I'm sure she's had it with all of you, her repeated conversations with me about just what's at stake here. But I know that there's no use crying over something that we can't control. But the reality is I think it's important that the community understand that 3 successive town managers and interim town managers have raised concerns about this particular arrangement with the site. You know, most of us as selectmen have raised concerns about the arrangements we have with the site. And now we have something being saddled on us that are, outside of our control. But as we discussed at the last meeting I was able to attend, the Department of Revenue is there to act as a check to make sure that municipalities are, doing right by the taxpayers who fund our budgets. And I'm not happy with this decision. I would be upset with myself and with us as elected leaders if we weren't regularly sounding the alarm, though, about why we can't let this relationship continue moving forward the way that it is. And it's a little bit outside of our purview this evening, but it's why I'm happy that, that third-party long-term planning committee that was made up of people predominantly against the idea of leasing it did end up coming to a different conclusion after they dove in. And it really does leave me very disappointed that here we are as a municipality dealing with a pandemic, an international pandemic, and we are not being asked to dip into our rainy day fund to help our schools. We're not being asked to dip into our rainy day fund to help our police or our fire or our health departments. We're being asked to dip into our rainy day fund to support a wedding venue. And so I think it says a lot about the leadership of our town. So I applaud, Melissa Rodriguez. I applaud Lynn Savage, who it should come as no surprise. She's an 8-time, she's shepherded our town through 9 times of winning international recognition for the quality of our budget. And it's perhaps why every department is run so amazingly well. But I think that, we need to be clear as town leaders that, this is something that, is not great. And it's not for lack of trying on our part that we've tried to head off such an awful situation. So I'm a little bit frustrated with this. A little bit frustrated, but not because of anything our hired town staff has done. They've tried their best with a situation that has been outside of their control.
However, though, the legislative body at town meeting did come forward with a different option and they wanted to research it and come up with something, and that's what they did. And that also needs to be respected, that at the end of the day, it's the same legislative body that chose to buy it when we were in much worse financial shape. I mean, by far than we are now. I mean,
Indeed.
we were.
And so that legislative body, you are absolutely right, and we should respect it, and we have, which is why we're in this situation. Because of course, if it were up to the elected body, which is responsible for dealing with this day in and day out, and the professional staff begged the lay folks of North Andover who make up our town meeting, which is our legislative body, to consider alternatives because the current situation was untenable. And a succession of professional town managers and financial staff asked for that. And here we are today. And so if anybody has any questions, I mean, they can go, I guess, to that legislative body that made this decision, I suppose, because we respected this. As you recall, the members of this Board of Selectmen who may have disagreed with that body said, okay, you've given us this task. We're going to find a way to make it work. And unfortunately, well, here we are today. So we are now dipping in and using $300,000 of taxpayer money. And again, kudos to all those departments that somehow managed to survive without this, and not ask for this. And I realize, by the way, that Stevens Estate is not asking. They're being told by the state that they have to access this money. But I mean, this is exactly why government should not be subsidizing a wedding venue. And so in the middle of this pandemic, as our kids are not getting the education they should expect or deserve, and those are the reasons, by the way, that people buy homes in North Andover. It's because of the quality of those services, not because we have a bougie wedding venue. It's upsetting that here we are dipping into that taxpayer money when it's already pretty unaffordable for people, especially my age, to live here. We are dipping in $300,000 of taxpayer money to support the wedding venue.
But that's not entirely true. My understanding is, and Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is like a bridge loan until we can make other arrangements on it. It's not that we necessarily are going to be spending this money.
Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to make cuts to the budget, and then we're going to be using our retained earnings as well as any additional revenue that's brought in from this point forward. And if need be, our capital expenditures that have not been expended yet for the enterprise fund only, and we'll make a transfer at May town meeting of as much as we can back to the stabilization. Correct.
So
Melissa, hearing that example laid out, though, so what happens,
Mhm.
we're in a pandemic and wedding venues are not pulling in the type of money that event venues overall are not able to pull in the type of money they need to sustain themselves to the degree they were pre-pandemic. What happens if we do not collect enough money as a Stevens Estate to pay back that money, to pay
We
back
have
the
about-
300,000?
So we have about $90,000 left in stabilization. I mean, in our retained earnings. So we will transfer that first, and then we will use the capital expenditures, which is about $170,000. So that would mean that there'd be a few capital projects that wouldn't go forward, unfortunately, to offset as well. But at the end of the day, if we have to use the retained earnings and the capital expenditures, we will no longer have, right, a savings account or any cushion in the Stevens Estate budget, which will have to be, if the RFP did not move forward at town meeting this May, we'd have to be exceptionally frugal in our budget next year, because we certainly don't want to end up in a situation like this again. One, and I don't think that DOR is going to be watching this very closely as well moving forward. So we would have to present a reduced budget for the next fiscal year as well.
So Melissa, what's in this scenario? Should we, vote to? And I think that again, we're between a rock and a hard place, and I would rather us access stabilization funds, which is still, taxpayer dollars, than seeing a situation where we're forced to make cuts in the parts of government that are required. That I think that we have a social contract with our residents that we provide adequate police, fire, mental health, public health support, building and economic development departments, and of course our public schools, and so DPW, etc. What's the maximum exposure then for our town? Like what's the maximum exposure as far as the number of dollars that we may not recoup, and what's an educated guess on the most reasonable outcome given the direction that we seem to be moving economically in this pandemic?
So we extrapolated that we think that with the budget cuts, the budget will come in around $212,000. So based on that number, we would be able to offset using the retained earnings as well as some of the capital expenditures. Unfortunately, any of the deposits that come in will now have to be credited to the next fiscal year, as we know. So worst case scenario, right? If we were not able to make any budget cuts at all, and we had perhaps spent the entire budget, the 360, I think our exposure would be about $80,000 that we would not be able to bring back. If we forecast it correctly and we spend only around the 212, then we would not have any exposure.
No exposure, but still, okay, and that's important, right? Because at the end of the day, as long as taxpayers aren't left on the hook, but in that scenario, that also means we've depleted every savings account.
That would mean we would have
Associated with the
depleted
Stevens
the
estate.
retained earnings, correct?
Okay.
But
Which
there are,
basically
but
was
but Melissa, am I correct in saying that DOR wouldn't even allow you to, which we've done in the past, is count the bookings coming forward with their deposits and so forth and so on? And aren't there already some bookings like coming up in June or?
correct. DOR is saying is that this year they will not allow us to use deposits fiscal year as well. So that's what's creating that kind of strange gap that we haven't seen in the past, right? We've got this kind of $50,000 gap this year because we are not allowed to use the deposits this year when we're receiving them. So we have some revenue for next year already, which is in the form of deposits that we anticipate based on what's been booked so far and what we expect to be booked. But that won't be in retained earnings, right? That's just a revenue source for next year.
And again, that this is a practice that we've been doing for 19 years. And just if someone's tuning in and didn't follow what came forward before, that we've been doing the budget this way for 19 years. They changed the rules on us, and we got caught. Not caught. That's really not the right word, but we got, I guess, caught up in a new way of doing things with little to no notice. And the other thing too, just to be perfectly clear, when you say cutting the budget, exactly for people at home, exactly whose budget are you cutting?
So that's correct. And anybody who is interested in kind of following along certainly could by going to our agenda and looking at the memo, which outlines probably in much detail all of the facts as well as the three options that we're talking about. When I'm talking about cutting the budget, it's not a physical cut. What we'd be doing is basically doing a spending freeze in the enterprise fund budget for the state, and we already had a spending freeze on for non-essential spending through all of our budgets, just because we returned revenues. But this would be a much more dramatic freeze than the other departments are seeing right now due to the lack of revenue.
You know what? I'm having a terrible time hearing you. So if you.
Phil, maybe if you go on mute, Phil, I think we're getting some feedback from your phone.
So Melissa, you're talking about cutting or the enterprise budget.
Yes, the only cuts would be to the Stevens Estate enterprise fund budget. It wouldn't even be a real cut, right? Our goal is not to spend the entire budget, because if we don't spend the entire budget, it's less that we have to take from the stabilization account. So that's the plan. The plan is to spend less, which is the plan that we had outlined in the memo and the plan that we had submitted to DOR in the first place, was that we do not anticipate spending the whole $360,000. We anticipate spending close to around the 212 benchmark. And that's because we haven't had as many events this year, obviously. And so our costs have not been as significant.
So just so to be perfectly clear, and the reason I was asking you these questions is to try to make it clear for anybody who's listening. So we're not cutting other departments' budgets. This is only cuts in the enterprise, and hence that's why it is an enterprise budget. Am I correct? Am I stating that clearly enough or correctly?
Correct. The only budget that is being impacted by this is the Stevens Estate budget. The general fund budget, as well as the water and sewer enterprise fund budgets, are not being affected by anything that we're doing tonight. And I know you couldn't
Okay.
before, if people are confused and needing more information, they certainly can find that in the memo.
So,
Okay, thank you. But I just wanted that to be, that when we use the word budget, that we weren't talking about, the DPW snow budget or school budget or police and fire or Board of Health, which is very important to us right now. So I just thank you for answering my questions. It was my attempt to make it a little bit more clear to the public.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
And tonight.
Please.
So, Madam Town Manager, so this is the second year then that we won't be getting money from the Stevens Estate to support the capital fund, right? So last year we kind of forgave that because of again, a lack of bookings and a down year. But so this will be the second year then that we would not be getting money to support the capital projects in the Stevens Estate. So that's a concern too, right? If that's true, because that means, we're kind of letting things go there where we don't have the money that we're putting back into the estate.
We made two changes to the budget for fiscal year 21. One was that we did not put any capital expenditures in the budget. So in the past 4 years, from 17 to 20, we did do capital from retained earnings. And it had started to really deplete the retained earnings over that period of time. For fiscal year 21, we did not do any major capital articles, although we had several CPC articles that were funded. And so we were doing capital through those. And two, we moved the indirect costs into the general operating budget. So those were two changes that were made for the fiscal year 21 budget.
Okay.
I think go ahead, Laura.
Madam Town Manager, when you were talking about us not doing anything and DOR would go with the tax levy, I thought we did not have enough capacity in the levy to
We
do
don't.
that.
So what
So
they
what
would
would happen?
They would make cuts to things like our overlay, so our tax overlay is a separate account that we have that we use to pay for abatements. So if you have, a company that says their tax bill is too much and then they take us to special tax court, we often have to pay back taxes. So they would make cuts from places like that, which can be very dangerous, especially if you have large cases going on. So we usually keep that at about $500,000. They'd make cuts on their own to that type of spending.
Okay, so we would lose basically control of where we want the money to come from if we didn't do anything. And I think it's important to kind of keep going back to the fact that even though we're not maybe putting the burden on the taxpayers in that $30, that it's still taxpayer money that's coming out of the stabilization fund. And even though we have, we are between a rock and a hard spot, and we're able to cover this transfer right now, which we're lucky that we can, I guess, with the stabilization fund. Come to fiscal year 2022, it's going to deplete the retained earnings of Stevens Estate. And to piggyback on what Selectman Valancourt just said, we're not doing the maintenance on the Stevens Estate. So I think these are all just important points as we move forward with the Stevens Estate. I think this is the best solution that we could have come to at these times, but I think that those are just things that we all need to keep in the back of our head as we move forward. But thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Well, I think as I listen to the other members here, I think it is important to, while we have this immediate issue to resolve in front of us, look at it in the context of the path that we've been on. And to your point, Dick, we've been on this path, particularly in the last 2 years. We're consuming our reserve, which limits our options going forward. And of course, in the meantime, our asset continues to be exposed and devalue if it needs any type of major repair. So that exposure continues to grow forward with this. So yes, it's fortunate that we have a way to reduce our expenses. We do have the reserve to cover us this year, but there's only so many times we can go to the well. And again, Melissa, really appreciate what you and Lynn have done in crafting this path for us. But I think from a very practical standpoint, I'm appreciative that we do have the opportunity to get the RFP out there and to have that discussion as that comes back, because I think this brings to light all the things that Phil, you and Dick have expressed here tonight, which is we have a ongoing exposure here with something that it's not just a budget, but it's an expense that we're not sure what our revenue piece is, unlike anything else that we're doing in the town. So I appreciate the steps we're taking tonight, and let's see where this gets us. Could I ask you, Madam Town Manager, can you tell us where we are with that RFP at this point? I know we were very close to getting at least the word out with that. Is that still on track for us?
Yep. So I have a draft, and 2 members of the long-term advisory committee and 1 member of the trustees are reviewing it. I've asked for edits by Monday. So as soon as we get those back, we will get that advertised on your agenda so you can see it as well, and moving forward. So we're pretty close to, I think, having a final document there, which is exciting.
Okay, great. Are there any other thoughts from the board before I ask for a motion?
I would just add this final point, and I think that this is helpful moving forward, especially as an RFP is produced. Melissa, can you give us like a ballpark idea over the past couple weeks how many hours you've spent on this issue, specifically, but also overall on the Stevens estate?
I couldn't. I wish I could. I don't know.
Several hours.
This is yes, an unusual amount of time has been spent on one department over the last few weeks. Not unusual for that to happen, right? Certainly not in an emergency mode, which we've been in on this.
And that's not just you. That's financial staff. It's people like Lord Burzloff or D. Casey or Lynn Savage. And so, it's our own time. I was not able to make last Wednesday's selectmen's meeting. We don't typically meet on Wednesdays. And so I had a pre-scheduled work meeting. However, 4 of you did meet. I mean, these are all town resources and town time spent that doesn't appear on the balance sheet. It doesn't show up as an expense associated with the Stevens estate. But we all do still collect a paycheck in one way or another. And those are funded by the taxpayers. And so right now, that's taxpayer funding activities and work associated with the Stevens estate, because when these problems arise, it is the taxpayers who still have to pay to make sure that the people are there to fix them. And so, I mean, granted, we aren't exactly pulling in big bucks as individual selectmen with our monthly stipend, but I think that that's an important piece that people need to remember, that for every hour spent on this, in the middle of an international pandemic, as we continue to struggle with making sure we deliver education that we find as a community is acceptable, as we continue to try to deliver on public health needs that, well, we're in a pandemic, so naturally there are public health needs. As we continue to try to usher Amazon into this community, we have hours and hours of time and resources, and staff resources specifically, being spent on this. And so, again, it's not a number that you typically see at town meeting. It's not a number that you're going to see in the budget, but make no mistake, these are costs associated with this continued operation. So that's it.
The only thing that I would add to that, what you said is not entirely wrong, but we are in the middle of a pandemic, and the regulations that are coming from the state have deeply impacted this facility as well. So you can't just pick and choose which departments. I mean, Board of Health has been working unbelievably hard. The school department, police and fire. I mean, everyone has paid the cost. So of working very hard, and thankfully, I think we're doing a pretty good job for what we're being dealt. But to pull out just one group and say, well, you're putting a lot of time into it, I would venture to say that a lot of time is being put into many other departments, and not just with the financial staff, but the people who do the day-to-day operations.
I have to say, I think then you're missing the point. I am completely in
No, I
agreement
don't think
with
I'm
you.
missing the point. I'm just,
Nope.
let me, I don't think I'm missing the point,
responding to a statement that I made, and I want to be crystal clear about this. Any hour that is being spent right now by town staff on the Stevens estate has to be considered when we consider what the overall cost of maintaining that estate is. Because we often try to take it as a separate bucket. We don't do that with the other departments because the other departments are not enterprise funds. And yet right now, yes, we're dealing with an issue that is caused in part by the Department of Revenue, but it doesn't change the fact that town staff that we fund to run our community now have to spend time, and we all only have so many hours in a day. We ourselves as selectmen right now are meeting when otherwise I should be having dinner with my family and you should be having dinner with your families. We are having a meeting right now to talk about the Stevens estate. We're not having a special meeting to talk about any other type of function of town government. So all of the time being spent right now should be considered when it comes to the overall cost of maintaining this facility as part of the town government. That's the
And
point
I
I'm
would say
trying to
back
make.
to you, and I said to you, you are making a point with that. However, we got our direction from the legislative body at town meeting to work on figuring out a plan for the Stevens estate. And that's what everybody's doing. That's part of our charge as well.
Indeed, and I'm not saying we're doing something this evening that we aren't supposed to be doing. I'm saying this is something that needs to be part of the conversation as we consider, should we be doing this moving forward? I think there was a strong discussion at town meeting a year and a half ago about what are the obligations of our municipality to the Stevens estate. And there's a lot of numbers that got thrown around. And I think it was really tough for people to follow what's the actual cost. I'm saying right now that you have at least 7 people that are employed by the town of North Andover in one way or another, working on a Monday night trying to figure out the solution. And that's after several weeks of them spending their days and evenings. Because again, you folks, my colleagues, you met last Wednesday evening, again, with several of our town staff. This is all time, money, and manpower spent on putting together a plan for a facility that there are reasonable discussions that have been had in the past about why they should not, this facility should not continue to be owned and operated by the town. And the discussion coming back is, well, no, this is actually really the cost. And I think that given the conversation this evening, we can't forget that every time we have these conversations, every time our town staff has to spend time focused on this type of response, this is resources spent that could be spent on other parts of town government. So yes, we did get our marching orders from town meeting. And I think that town meeting should understand that it's not just operating a facility and the staff that we employ there are the only ones doing it. There are dozens of other people outside of the scope of the Stevens estate budget that are expected to contribute to that facility's success.
That's an emotionally charged item, Mr. Chair, but the good news is there's
Yes.
so many people who want to do the right thing, and we all have the same goal, which is figuring out how to manage and care for the state and the best for the town. So it's a good thing we're telling people trying to move it forward right now, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree. And again, this is the step we have to take, but it is a path that we've chosen, and we may have some options going forward. And I'm glad that we had this discussion. I think it sets the table for the future. Let's see if we can address the immediate item at hand. Are we ready for a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that under the authority granted by Chapter 92 of the Acts of 2020, Section 10B, and in the interest of acting expeditiously during COVID-19 state of emergency, the Board of Selectmen transfer $300,000 from the stabilization fund account to the Osgood Hill Enterprise Fund account.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Rosemary. Appreciate it. If we just have a roll call vote, please.
Laura Bates, aye.
Phil DiCollegiero, aye.
Rosemary Smedili, aye.
Richard Valencourt, yes.
And Chris Nobley, aye. The vote passes 5-0. Thank you again for us getting this done, moving forward. Melissa, obviously, we're going to keep a close eye. I know you're going to keep a close eye on how we do progress over the coming months. We'll knock on wood that your expectation of expenditures will bear out, and no surprises there. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Board. I appreciate the support.
With that, that's covered our business. We do have a meeting next Monday. So that's the fourth one is free, I guess, right? I'll get 3 in 2.5 weeks, 2 weeks. At 7 o'clock, I will note for those that are following us closely here, this will be a tri-board meeting. the first portion of it, which will include the school committee and the finance committee. We're really pleased to have them join us. It's been, I don't know if it's happened this millennium, but certainly hasn't happened in the last 12 to 15 years, have all of us together. And maybe that's,
I don't know that that's necessarily accurate, but
okay.
Because I've been to those meetings and we've had them, and we've had the budget communication group as our representatives who've attended those meetings from each of those boards as well. But as I think I mentioned earlier, that that had been changed by the previous town manager, that he would meet with the different groups individually. But no, I've been to a few.
Yeah. Well, good. We look forward to getting everybody together virtually in the same room. And I think that's really, to your point, the experience of getting everybody in the same room, especially when it comes to where we're headed with this budget and the facilities master plan. I think it's a great opportunity for us. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody next week. I'm sorry we have to do it virtually, but that's the world we're in right now. So with that, I'll hear a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a
Second.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Rosemary. Just a roll call vote, please.
Laura Bates, aye.
Phil DiColigiero, aye.
Rosemary Smedili, aye.
Richard Valencourt, yes.
And Chris Nobley, yes. Okay, everybody, have a good evening. We'll see you next Monday.